بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستنصره، فإنه حق من يهدي الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا رب العالمين، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر يا رب العالمين. Just minutes before the khutbah, literally minutes, I heard of the breaking out of violence in Syria. And of course, I did not have time to read up on the matter. If it's possible to read up on such matters in popular media, because it's often just not very accurate. But anyway, I did not have time to even get preliminary information. But the theme that is in so many articles that popped out, the theme is pro-Assad forces and the very real danger of sectarian violence. And of course, whenever you talk about a governmental power and a minority, the direction of the sectarian violence will be well known, that the minority will be targeted and abused because it is a minority. My mind, which is what I want to share with you, since we are habitually visited by this kind of news. All of us grew up, well, all of us from the Middle East part of the world. But I dare say that the vast majority of Muslims from Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries grew up between this dichotomous awareness that either we are exposed to the death of despotism, the deadly silent death of despotism, either the suffocations and the asphyxiations of despotism, either the static dullness and thorough ineptitude, the living death, zombie-like existence of despotism, or anarchical violence, the kind of violence that is inflicted by a collectivity or a group that is privileged in power against another group that is largely helpless. And where my mind went is how this dichotomous the reality, either you encounter people who are effectively the living dead because of despotism, or you encounter another type of living death, and that's the living death of irrational violence, immoral violence, not violence necessarily in self-defense, but violence that violates the exact divine prescription, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى, that one sin cannot be an excuse for another, that you cannot kill or harm people because of collective fault, because of collective blame. And as I said in the past, regardless of where Assad, what minority Assad belonged to, and quite regardless of what minority Assad placed in power and what those people placed in power might have done, quite regardless of that, because the whole, if anyone is actually aware of the message of the Qur'an, the whole message of the Qur'an, the whole point of the Qur'an is the elevation of the human soul and the elevation of human thinking beyond the exigencies of the moment, beyond alarmist thinking, beyond impulsive thinking that claims to be rational, based in realism, but is largely amoral. That's precisely the thinking that the Qur'an came to counter. Regardless of what minority Assad could have tapped into, or a dictator could have tapped into, the most irrational thing, and it is truly irrational, the most irrational thing is to punish the members of that minority because they did what human beings, even if they did, for the sake of argument, they did what all human beings do when they find limitless power and despotism and cronyism. I'll put it differently. In the same surah, in Surah Fatir, where Allah tells us, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى, one sin cannot be an excuse for another. You cannot punish the innocent because you associate the innocent with some guilt. You can't say, well, I'm punishing you because your brother did something wrong, or I'm punishing you because your father did something wrong, or I'm punishing you because you belong to this type of people or that type of people. In that same surah, Surah Fatir, is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, besides warning us about the tremendous trap of associative guilt, or guilt by association, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us something that we pass over all the time. And that is in this surah in particular, where Allah alerts us to the fact that the truly knowledgeable, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَخْشَى مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء, that it is the truly knowledgeable, the ulama, the learned ones, are the ones who are truly capable of fearing God. And I've always paused at this ayah in Surah Fatir, because in order to understand the Quran, you must always ask, why in this surah? What is the totality of the message? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us? And how does the message coherently fit together? So already we have two elements. One, you can't punish the innocent for the faults of another. You simply cannot say, well, your sect killed some of my men or all of my men, so I'm going to punish you collectively. You cannot be a person of God if you act this way. The second element we already have is Allah telling us the converse. If you flip the message a little, it's as if Allah is saying the ignorant don't truly fear God. It is only those with a level of awareness. What is ulama? Education, knowledge, awareness. For your thinking to go beyond impulses and emotion, for you to act in a principled way. That is what an alim is. When you see someone who's just acting impulsively, you say, what I see is an example of the barbaric, the ignorant, the unknowing. When I see someone acting out of principle, someone who has awareness of the lessons of the past, the reality of the moment, and acting in a principled way towards the trajectory of the future, you say, yes, I see someone with ilm, I see someone with knowledge. So in this surah, Surah Fatir, is what Allah says, chooses to tell us. And I know Muslims have for a long time just chucked it up. You know what Allah is talking about is that those who are true scientists know the miracles of creation and that's why they fear God. No. You can't, this is taking the ayah out of its context. Well, what is the context of the ayah beyond the issue of associative guilt? Well, also, this is the same surah, Surah Fatir, where Allah warns us not to join Hizb al-Shaytan, not to join the party of Shaitan. And Allah reminds us that Shaitan is adu, فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. Shaitan is an enemy. But again, Allah has warned us against Shaitan in many contexts. So what is special about Surah Fatir and the warning in Surah Fatir? Well, Surah Fatir reminds us of the elusiveness of what is right versus what's wrong. The elusiveness. Well, how so? Well, in Surah Fatir is where Allah reminds us that the two seas, freshwater sea and saltwater sea, cannot be the same. Allah tells us that from each of these seas, in fact, you are capable of getting some benefit. How? Well, you fish in both of them. You get fish from both of them. Allah reminds us in Surah Fatir that darkness and lights are not equal. Heat and cold are not the same. And while you can obtain food from both seas, Fresh water and salt water are not the same. Well, that's rather obvious, so what? Well, it's important because Allah is telling you being the type of alim, being the type of person that acts out of principle, being the type of person that acts because you are anchored in divine principles, because you are rooted in your alliance with Allah, because you are not a part of Hizb al-Shaitan, you are part of Hizbullah, the party of God. That yes, what is wrong and what is right can appear to be the same. Salt water looks like fresh water. Both can have fish. You can get fish from fresh water, you can get fish from salt water. But they are not the same thing. The path of God is not the same as the path without God. The path of being anchored in this faith is not the same as acting out of this faith. And this ultimately is crowned in Surah Fatir in the iconic message, من يريد العزة فإن لله العزة جميعا. Those who understand the nature of Izzah. What is Izzah? Izzah is not arrogant dignity, but it is righteous dignity. Izzah is not false honor, but it is true honor. And it is not a coincidence that in Surah Fatir, Allah tells us, yes, things might be deceptive because you can get fish from salt, both the fresh water and salt water. Yes, things might be deceptive because you can have the claim of izzah, you can have the claim of honor and dignity from both those who are the party of Shaitan and those who are the party of God. But Allah reminds us, after reminding us that Izzah, true Izzah, pure Izzah, clean Izzah, purified Izzah, luminous Izzah, belongs with Allah. Allah reminds us, وَمَكْرُ أُولَٰئِكَ سَوْفَ يَبُورُ, that the difference between what is with God and without God is that without God, what is part of the party of Shaitan, in the long run, its path is the path of destruction, horror, agony, and failure. If you are true believers, your path, لن يبور. Yabur means to ultimately fail miserably. So in Surah Fatir, where Allah tells you, yes, it often appears that the right and wrong are the same. Yes, it often appears that the path of righteousness and the path that is other than righteousness are one and the same. Yes, it appears that the path of true morality, that you might even be tempted to say, well, you can be moral without God. Well, you can be ethical without God. You might be even tempted to say, you can be righteous without Islam. And Allah doesn't deny that you can get fish from salt water. The path that looks like it is the right path might yield good. But ultimately, they are not the same. And they are not equal. And that is, if you have true belief in Allah, you anchor your izzah in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you realize that there is no izzah without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have faith and belief that the path of righteousness remains, and the path that is not righteous ultimately leads to bawar. Bawar means destruction and failure. But look, the Qur'an might speak to you, and if you have no ilm, if you do not have a moral consciousness that can turn what the Qur'an says into an actual force and an actual movement, put simply or put differently, the same message about Hizb al-Shaytan and Hizbullah, that same message in the hands of the ignorant, it's very dangerous. In the hands of the knowledgeable, al-ulama, those who are truly knowledgeable, it can yield much good. But in the hands of the ignorant, it is very dangerous. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Now, the height of this ignorance, is sectarianism. And sectarian violence in all of its forms. This is precisely why this same Quran, it could land upon an ignorant people. The same Quran, when it talks to an ignorant people, how are they ignorant? Well, they're ignorant because they do not learn from the lessons of history. What can be greater ignorance than repeating the same mistakes over and over and over and over? When we see that the Israelis have united the Ashkenazi and the Sephardim, the Israelis have united their many divergent schools of thought into one cause, and that cause is to steal Palestinian lands and to steal Muslim holy sites. And yet they stand united. When we see that in the long history of colonialism, the same countries that used to go to war against one another, the French against the British, and the British against the German, have learned from history and put their differences aside and act as if one people and one body. So much so that even if there is a tariff war, all of us know it's an outlier and it's a one-off and it won't last. Why? Because we know that when it comes to Westerners, there is a basic, essential moral unity that even if they disagree and fight amongst one another, when it comes to an external danger, if tomorrow there's an attack like 9/11, they will put their differences aside and they will all send their forces under the NATO banner to do whatever they want to do. But yet Muslims, for centuries, their enemies have defeated them simply by allowing them to conquer themselves. For centuries, whenever the enemy has wanted to colonize Muslims, it was the same policy of divide and conquer. It was always the same of turn the Arab against the Persian, turn the Sunni against the Shia, time and again and again and again. So yes, the interim government in Syria, one understands, if attacked, that they defend themselves. But to act contrary to what Allah has taught and anchored, don't act out of vain pride. Don't act out of desire for revenge, because that's false izzah. Don't hold people collectively guilty and collectively responsible. And the thing that drives me absolutely crazy, when I hear the ignorant describe the other as a kafir. Because you are accusing God. Look, if you're a Sunni, the Shia are a fact of life, not just in Iran, not just in Iraq, not just in Syria, Not just in Yemen, not just in Saudi, not just in Bahrain, not just in Kuwait. Where the heart of Islam is, the old Arabia, where Islam sprung, Iraq, Syria, Arabia, Yemen. The Shia have been a fact of life from the very beginning. And then you are saying that Allah allowed, if you start saying being Shia is kufr, you accuse Allah of allowing this kufr to spread, to exist and spread in the heart of the Muslim heartland. That accusation itself is kufr. Because it is in the heartland, when that heart fights itself, it is no wonder that the body dies. Have you ever seen a heart go to war against itself? Well, when Sunni and Shia fight, it is a heart that goes to war against itself, and it will inevitably kill the body. But look, again, for the learned, the lessons of history, the same lessons that taught the French and the German and the British to put their differences aside and to come together under one banner, the same lessons have repeatedly taught Muslims that when you divide the Sunni and Shia, it is only the enemies of Islam that win. And it's only the enemies of Islam that colonize you both, that defeat you both, that conquer you both. Look, because of the division between Iran and Saudi, a Muslim against a Muslim, Saudi has run to the arms of the Israelis. The Emirat has run to the arms of the Israelis. Bahrain has run to the arms of the Israelis. So you ran from your Muslim brother to your colonizer, literally. A heart at war with itself. Do you start to understand why, when Allah tells us, understand that yes, there might be two bodies of water, but one is fresh water and one is salt water. From both you get fish. From both you get nourishment. From both you feed yourself. However, they are not equals. Yes, Izzah might look like, but both with or without Allah, it looks like dignity. It looks like success. It looks like honor. But real Izzah with Allah is very different than without Allah. So ultimately, what the message is, be careful. Because Hizb al-Shaytan, the Hizb of Shaitan, the party of Shaitan, can look very much like Hizbullah, like the party of God. It's not a matter of a slogan, and it's not a matter of a flag. It's a matter of your morality. And this is precisely why Allah tells us in the same surah that Allah needs the knowledgeable. Because it is the knowledgeable, those people with knowledge. Al-ulama are the ones who are truly capable of understanding and acting upon Allah's message. Because if you are ignorant, then this message not just falls upon deaf ears, but this message can actually be dangerous. So, just minutes before the khutbah started, I had just had the opportunity to run to the computer and to check the headlines. And when I read in the headlines that there was an attack on the new government forces, and we all know that this attack is by pro-Assad forces, that for the average Shia, Alawi in Syria has nothing to do with them. But even if a particular person, a person advanced in age, a woman, a child, in their heart they supported the group that attacked security forces, a true alim, a true person of God, a truly knowledgeable, would say, I'm not going to bite. I've learned, I've been raised by my Prophet, and being raised by my Prophet, I know I cannot, because X murdered my friend, I can't go and just haphazardly choose anyone or punish the innocent or punish by association or say, I don't like your beliefs, so I'm going to target you. The real ulama, it is not the amount of hadith you memorize. It is not the amount of Qur'an you memorize. It is not all the pretenses of knowledge. It is not. It is the izzah that animates you. Where does your izzah come from? In other words, where does your morality come from? What type of human being are you? Have you learned the lessons of history? Have you paid attention that your enemies have always dominated you by divide and conquer? Have you truly contemplated what it means, if you're Sunni, for there to be millions of Shia? And that it is not your right to say, well, all these millions are just wrong and going to hell. No one has given you this right. Even if you most strongly disagree, even if you vehemently disagree, that's why Allah alerts you in Surah Fatir about the special status of the true alim and how that type of person is the type of person that can actually heed the message of Surah Fatir, understand it, and turn it into goodness. I pray to Allah, and I hope you pray with me, that those in power in Syria pay very careful attention that the type of barbaric violence generated by the Assad regime cannot be generated by the new regime, or to put differently, that the barbaric violence of the Assad regime is no excuse for barbaric violence of the same kind by anyone else, including the new regime. I pray, and I hope you pray with me, that the new Syrian government heeds the lessons of history and pays attention to who is the party of God and who is the party of Satan, and does not oppress a minority, even if the former president might have come from this minority. Although technically the former president was not a Alawi, he was a Nusayri. But anyway, and there's a big difference between Nusayris and Alawis in their system of belief. It is very sad the powerful message of this God needs an audience that rises to the level of the message. Because otherwise, in the hands of the ignorant, it is truly disastrous. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم ارحمنا يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم تب علينا يا تواب يا كريم اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا رب العالمين. Allah, empower us to heed your message, to rise to the occasion of being the recipients of the Qur'an, the bearers of the Qur'an, the servants of the Qur'an. Allah, enable us to be among the truly knowledgeable, the type of knowledge that makes us anchored in the principles of the Qur'an, in the morality of the Qur'an, following the sunnah of your Prophet, Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وأقم الصلاة.